Check it out, Bubba. We got a new favorite coffee mug. Look at that. It's fresh from Alabama. Frank and Marie, we appreciate you. Roll Tide. Hey, puppy. What do you think? You like that one?
Huh? Now I wait to see what the hell we're doing. Slide right up.
It's not the one we called up, is it? Man, that'd take a while. And this is how you come down. Another day alive. Go figure. Another one. Got my new favorite mug. Worked pretty good. And I got a lot of voices to be heard. Like I got about 200 feet of fencing left to do, and then I'm complete on that. And then my reward, I'm going into the woods for a few days. And that's my reward. Get grounded out, do some hunting. See if I can't find that big old senior citizen bear that I'm after. But anyways, another night of no sleep. I don't know why. It's 2 nights now. Kind of sucks when that happens. So let's get right into hearing people. This one's titled Encounters. Actually, just Better title it Red right now or screw up. Steve. Greetings, brother, from East Texas. I've been a follower since day one. I grew up in the Trinity River bottom of East Texas. I'm currently retired from the Marines, where I served as an infantry/raider grunt. Spent at least 200 days a year in the bush by myself in some remote places. Spoke to a lady a few days ago that had a wooden cutout of a sabe outside her establishment. I asked if she's seen the hairy man in the area, and with a sincere, straight face, she stated they're seen often by many people. I'll not give the exact location for obvious reasons. It's 2 hours west of Louisiana and between Dallas and Houston. I personally never had an encounter either visually or audio, nor come across any prints, and I'm okay with that too. Keep feeding us the intel about the forest people, and we'll keep absorbing everything we hear. Thanks, brother. I will, man. You do the same too, alright? You come across something that you think's worthy, send it. Send it on over. Please. Who's next? Mark, this is Red. This title, Sir. First off, I just want to say that I've enjoyed all of your videos. I actually came across your videos by happenstance while just surfing different topics on YouTube. Now, as an introduction, I'm retired military, 22 years in the U.S. Army with multiple deployments. I'm originally from Washington State, but now live in West Virginia. I grew up hunting, fishing, and doing ranch work on my father's property that was located outside of a town called Cleelum. Probably pronounced Clelum? I don't know. Capital C-L-E, capital E-L-U-M. This sounds familiar. Just east of the Cascade Mountain Range. I'll now convey a couple of experiences I had on our ranch. My first experience with something was when I was 16 years old. I decided I would stay overnight watching a cattle pond. It is fed by a natural spring and the only water source for miles around, or needless to say, we would see deer, bear, and even on rare occasion a cougar and other wildlife all the time. It was deer season, so my plan was to stay in a band of heavy brush and wait for sunup and try to catch one of the big bucks I'd seen earlier. Anyways, I dozed off when something around midnight. I was awoke sometime around midnight. I was woken by the sounds of vibrations. Yes, vibrations of something coming up behind me. Needless to say, I was scared shitless. I was wrapped up in a sleeping bag in the prone, and my first thought was, shit, it's a damn bear and I can't get turned around. I just froze. The sounds of the steps stopped, but were immediately replaced with the sounds of heavy breathing that was almost grunt-like at times. This lasted maybe a minute, probably less, when I decided hell with it. I started rolling over with my 30-06 in my hands, and as all hell broke loose, I heard the sound of brush being busted through, and by the time I fully rolled over, it was all over. No sounds, nothing in sight, and I mean the woods were absolutely soundless. I stood up, started scanning the area around me. Absolutely nothing was moving. It was a full moon night, so needless to say, it was bright as hell. No cloud cover at all. I stayed the night but didn't fall asleep once. When morning came, I waited but saw nothing come down to the pond. No deer, no nothing. I thought that was strange, as we would always see deer early in the morning. There was not even any bird or squirrel chatter like normal. I immediately got the feeling I was being watched. So I said, the hell with it, and walked back to the cabin. My dad asked how it went, and I told him I thought a bear came by or whatever it was, and I knew it was no damn bear. My second strange experience was when I was 19 years old. Some friends from the church I was attending along with our pastor, and I decided to do some deer hunting at the ranch. The hunt went well, and the first night we had fresh venison that night. Around 9 or 10 p.m. we decided to crash, so we'd get up early, get in some hunt time, and then head back home since we were looking at about a 2-hour drive time. After about an hour in the cabin, we were all still up when someone said they heard something just outside. I figured it was probably just a coyote, to maybe a bear coming around after smelling a possible food source. We all went outside. I had a flashlight during this time, but we had a decent moon, so the illumination was pretty good. At first we saw or hear nothing, so we decided to go back in. Next thing I know, one of the guys says he sees something moving in the woodline to the north. It was about 25 to 30 yards away. We all stopped, and sure enough we could hear something moving. I shined the flashlight in the direction of the sound, and it stopped. As soon as I hit the area with light, everything went quiet again. At this point, I told the group to ignore it, as I thought it was probably a spooked deer, so I went back into the cabin. As soon as I closed the door, we all hear something heavy hit the side of the cabin. Now we're worried. Again, we all went outside and played the cat and mouse game with the flashlight. At this point, whatever we're dealing with was constantly moving back and forth in the woodline, almost as if it was a game to it. I yelled out, "Whoever you are, stop screwing around. You're trespassing and we are armed." After a few more minutes of this cat and mouse nonsense, I finally had enough and grabbed my rifle. I took aim away from whatever. The last thing I wanted to do was shoot some knucklehead who thought a good time was screwing with hunters on private property. It was, and instead aimed through the... That was in brackets. Sorry guys. I took aim away from whatever bracket. The last thing I wanted to do was shoot some knucklehead who thought a good time was screwing with hunters on the private property, end bracket. It was, and instead aimed through a break in the trees and sent a round into the hillside about 500 yards away. For just a second, we heard the sound of brush being broken through, then all was quiet. The rest of the night was quiet, and we ended up racking out till morning. The following morning we got up and just packed up and headed out. Everyone was a bit shaken. On the way home we stopped at a local diner my brothers and I always enjoyed eating at. During breakfast, the conversation naturally turned to what happened during the night. We all tried to shake it off as a curious bear, even though I have never heard of a bear throwing objects at structures or playing cat and mouse with a flashlight, lol. It was at this point the waitress came over to refill our coffee mugs. She told us she had heard a conversation and asked where we had been. I told her my last name and that we owned the ranch on top of Lookout Mountain, just outside of town. With no hesitation, she told us that a few of the local residents had recently reported similar things happening in that area, and a couple said they even saw the Bigfoot a couple times not far from our property. Years later, I looked that area up on a website, and sure as shit there were sighting markers fairly close to our property. Finally, as an addendum, while working the ranch growing up, there was an area of the ranch close to the water source that always gave me the creeps as if something was watching me. There's an old growth section of dense pine. Every time I walked through it, the sense of being watched was always there. Never heard bird, squirrel, or any other sounds in this section either, just dead silence. Even my hunting dog Boots hated when we walked through. He would whine, whimper, and if we stopped, he would try to dig a hole and lay in it. Only that one area of the ranch was weird, because that dog was fearless, and his idea of fun was chasing cattle every chance he could, lol. Well, that's some of my experiences with something out of the ordinary. I've never seen Bigfoot, but these two experiences, plus a few others, have convinced me we don't know every species on this earth. Keep up the videos and commentary. You come across as an honest dude that is interested only in the truth, unlike that turd bucket money taker. Kevin Stafford, U.S. Army retired. Kevin, appreciate you, man. Keep sharing. You keep learning, keep sharing, all right? Keep talking out loud. Keep sharing. Appreciate the kind words of support. Appreciate it. So this one. Hello, Steve. I'll tell you about me first. I'm a Canadian Armed Forces veteran who spent part of my military career with the Special Service Force in Petawawa, Ontario. Today, I'm 61 years old and I'm opening up on what happened to me not once but twice. I don't know when you sent this, but here's a late happy birthday, man. I first learned about this phenomenon when I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film when I was about 17. To me, it was just something that people had made up. One day I told my mother, who was born in Cochrane, Ontario, about this film. She looked at me and she told me with her honest, serious face, "What you have seen is the Wendigo. If you ever go in the woods and hear talking, it is the Wendigo calling you to take you to his lair. Beware, my son," she says. She never talked about it ever again until she died. I think I may have read this, but I'm going to read it again anyway. My first encounter was in CFB Petawawa in Ontario in '83. I was on a winter warfare course, and part of the course was to be taken to a bare mountaintop by helicopter and lived there for a week. Our bivouac was close to Algonquin Park, which is a pretty remote place by itself. To make things more difficult, the temperature while we were there didn't go over minus 25 Celsius. That's without the wind chill factor. It was so cold that week that they closed the base only to keep essential services, but since it was a survival exercise, we stayed up there for the week. At night, we had to do guard duty to make sure everything was safe inside and outside the camp, and of course, make us practice our defensive position. On one of my guard duty one night, I was doing my patrol around when I heard someone talking below our position. Then someone else answered. It was some kind of language I could not make out. It sounded like Japanese to me, but who in his right mind would come to such a remote place at minus 30 something just to test us around 2 a.m.? I went around the camp and made sure everyone was accounted for. The whole platoon was sleeping. I was the only one up. I returned to the defensive position I was at when I heard the voices. I listened and heard them voices again. I then shouted, "Who's there? Advance and show yourself." Silence was the answer I got. I shouted again the same thing. I didn't get any answer back again. I had my assault rifle but no live ammo, so I did the next best thing I knew. I fixed bayonet and waited for someone or something to come at me. I stayed on guard for an hour until I was relieved from my post. When my replacement showed up and saw me with the bayonet fixed on my rifle, he asked me, "What the F are you doing with that thing on your gun?" My only answer was that I was playing the real war game to keep me warm. I went to bed and that was it. Didn't mention anything on my report, didn't want to be tagged as crazy. My second encounter was the same year in CFB Wainwright, Alberta. I was part of a mobile repair team that was dispatched to a location with another tech to repair some communication equipment. We had the coordinates on the map and we were looking for a trail to reach the destination. I was driving and my partner was looking at the map to guide me. I happened to look to my left. There was an open field about 500 by 500 meters, and on both sides the forest is quite thick. About in the middle of the field, I saw a white-tailed deer munching on some leaves and watching all around. When he saw my truck, he stopped and started staring at us. I turned to tell my partner to look at the deer, then I turned my head back to look at the deer. I used to bow hunt at the time and I was trying to estimate the distance and how I could get close to him if I was in a hunting situation. And all of a sudden, quote, "that thing," end quote, came out of the woods like a rocket. It reminded me of a football player who was running to tackle the guy from the other team. It had the same shape too. That thing was huge and built like a bodybuilder. The color was dark brown, long arm, legs as big as a 45-gallon drum. The deer was still looking at my truck and never saw the thing coming. In a fraction of a second, the deer was grabbed by the neck and loaded on the thing's shoulder. He returned to the woods as fast as he came. You know a big white-tailed deer can be in Alberta, so try to imagine grabbing a hold of one by the neck, twist his neck at the same time that you load it onto your shoulder, all that while you run and don't stop. I asked my partner, "Did you see that?" He quit looking at the map and told me, "Did I see what?" "Never mind," I said. I knew too well not to try to explain the inexplicable. I kept driving and then we reached the destination. I didn't say a word until I came back to our base camp. I pulled my sergeant aside and asked him what would happen if I told him I saw something unusual in the training area. He looked at me and said, "Corporal, if it's going to give you an effing medal, tell me. If it's not going to get you an effing medal, shut the F up." Needless to say, I shut my pie hole and got back to what I had to do. After that event, I carried on with my career. Did some United Nations missions where I saw pretty incredible things. I went to Africa on a real photo safari and saw probably every animal in Darwin's Book of Evolution. But this thing is nowhere. Something you can see in a zoo, and I don't think we ever will for a long, long time. So, think what you want, but it is what it is. You can use my name if you want. I don't have a career to lose anymore. Gaetan Lacasse. Gaetan, I read this. I distinctly remember reading this, you guys, and I'm sure a lot of you here didn't hear it, so there you go. And just so you know, I've shot big Alberta white-tailed deer, and I shot one that was over 350 pounds. So, and I think your average white mature buck in Alberta is probably 2:30 anyways, probably. Imagine seeing that. You know, I think that is something, that's when you get something like that sent to you, and how many people, not a whole pile, commonly had a lot of people feel that they were being herded or moved into areas so they could ambush them. I believe that's just confusion of your senses because, I mean, listen to this. There's a perfect example. If one of these beings wants your ass, it's just going to get you. They don't have to try to herd a human somewhere so they can ambush them. That at this point of the game, that makes absolute zero sense. Not applicable. Not applicable. Something that strong, stealthy, supernatural in a way, more than likely. They don't have to try to attempt to stalk a human being at all. At all. You know what? Admittedly, I would like to see something like that go down. I would like to see them, one of them, from a distance, obviously. I wouldn't mind seeing that. I think. Seeing one of these people, human-like beings, hunting successfully and grabbing a moose or a elk, a deer, I don't care what. I'd like to see how they do it, how they move, and how they do it, how it goes down. You know, a lot of elk hunters have come up and interrupted hunts. And I keep thinking back to the Peace River. That man from fellow hunter from Fort St. John emailed me, and they were hunting elk in the timber not far from where I was, and saw that thing in between them and the elk, hunting the elk too. I think they're probably they're probably that close to seeing something go down too. Yeah, moving along. Mark this one as read. Good day, Steve. Thanks for giving me and the hundreds of others who write to you the chance to get heard and not ridiculed. Appreciate your no BS approach to this topic and for calling out the keyboard commandos who are not outdoorsmen, hunters, or real scientists. I envy your lifestyle and respect the decisions you made as a young man to focus on your passion. Appreciate the kind words, man. After college, I joined the military, as has the past 5 generations of men in my family. I served in Central America conflicts as well, as in operations in El Salvador, Panama, Honduras, Lebanon, Grenada, Kuwait, and Iraq, attaining the rank of captain. After this career, I moved to the private sector where I worked in technology for a company in Seattle. I hunted the backcountry of Oregon and Washington since I was 14. I've taken my share of wapiti, Roosevelt and Rocky Mountain elk, as well as bear and deer. In 2012, I purchased a Washington property at the Canadian border. My closest neighbors are at the border crossing about 12 miles away. It's not a guide's life, far from it. The home is a modest log cabin I built. In November 2018, I hiked up a creek bed on Independent Mountain hunting mule deer. I was in about 2 hours walk before daybreak to a hip on the east side of the mountain and was set up with a clear view down the trail and of the creek bed. The sound of the water cascading down the rocks of the creek hid my noise as I had approached. The sun was still minutes from first light when I saw a blacktail come from the western hip down toward the creek bed. He was 140 yards off and coming toward me. In the scope, I could see this was a buck. He was now hidden by trees and a rocky knob in the hillside. Excuse me. I picked out a spot in the creek where I thought he would emerge and shoulder my rifle. Just to the left of where I was focused was a dark shape. I had not noticed it in the dark ascent to this spot. It was about 20 feet from the water's edge, maybe 30 yards off. Setting in on the shape, it suddenly stood up. Hairy, dark creature, easily 9 feet tall, turned and looked right at me. Through the scope, I could sort of make out a hairless face in the dim morning light, almost human. It was as though he or it was staring right through the scope at me. I was scared shitless. Very long arms with biceps bigger than my waist. Still staring at me, it raised its left hand above its shoulder. I slowly lowered the rifle to the ground and raised my left arm. We held that posture for maybe 5 seconds when the creature lowers its arm. The creature turned and in 2 steps crossed the creek bed, ascended a near vertical 8-foot bank, disappearing into the forest within seconds. 2 nights later, back at the cabin around 10:30, my dogs, German Shepherd, alerted at something outside. They growled at first, then came a grunt and a shriek from the woods so deep and ominous the dogs ran and hid. I heard a commotion coming from the back of the property and ran to the door, grabbed the shotgun as I went. There was nothing. No sign of any animal or person. After a few minutes, the dogs calmed down and we spent a sleepless night listening and watching with all the lights out. Nothing more happened that night. The next morning I found that the steel walk door of my shop, must have meant lock, door of my shop had been ripped off its hinges and tossed about 60 feet into the trees with an impact that left a scar and a Douglas fir it hit. Holy crap. In the following days I found tracks near the cabin, nothing more. I prayed these creatures would never return. They did not that year, but last November I began hearing them in the woods, banging logs into trees, howls and odd chatter that was similar to what I heard on one of your videos. Contemplated selling that place and giving up. I've told no one of this. I'm not leaving this place and lifestyle I worked my entire life for. Use my name, I don't give a shit, and aside from those damn things, I do not fear anyone. And no one really gives a shit if I'm alive or dead. Zelig Cohen. There you go, just another story. Well, not really, it's your story, man, and it's important. And it's important that you share it with everybody, and you did, and I hope it helps in a way, and we all give a shit if you're alive or dead. Alright? And I hope it hasn't escalated anymore, and if it has, and you need any kind of help or advice, email me back. Or email me back with more knowledge you might have gathered. Alright, man? You're in the right place. And every single person here gives a shit, believe me. Keep sharing that knowledge, man. And you're right, don't give it up. You have just as much a right to be in the woods as any other living thing on this planet. That's a fact. That is a fact. Alright, here we go. Little slurp of go juice. I need it today. Okay, mark this as read. This is the title, Sabe, question mark. Hi Steve, I watch your channel because you created, praise God, an online community that truly feels like home. Listening to other people's experiences affirms my own sanity, and the comment section is always filled with encouraging voices, except for the random bad egg. But they don't last long, because they can't. Darkness simply can't exist where there is light. It's a good one for everybody. That should be on a t-shirt. Darkness simply can't exist where there is light. I've not seen a Sabe, but I've had many supernatural encounters throughout my life, and a few that have been Sabe related, which I'll share in a moment. I've seen a lot of the darkness of this world that I did not ask for, but would rather know the truth than be deceived. Some of the truth is dark and uncomfortable, some is not. If we avoid the uncomfortable stuff, then we're not really interested in truth, are we? If sharing some of my experiences helps someone else, great. If others want to think I'm crazy, so be it. It's not my burden to carry. As for my encounter, who knows, but an odd experience that I can't quite shake. It happened while sleeping in a tent with a friend about 20 years ago. On this occasion, my dear friend, I'll call him Eric, from Canada, came down to meet me in Western Massachusetts. We arrived too late to our friend's home to stay overnight there, so we decided to sleep in the tent that Eric had brought with him. I threw a woven blanket over a low barbed wire fence surrounding a wildlife management area that was across the dirt road from our friend's driveway. We stepped over and waded through the brambles to the best clearing we could find and pitched the tent. We were exhausted from our travels and it was too dark to see, so we settled for that spot to sleep until we could meet up with friends in the morning. Sometime in the middle of the night, I abruptly awoke to what I thought was a loud scream. My body was frozen, lying on my back, my eyes open just as Eric suddenly sat bolt upright. I don't actually remember the sound that woke me up. It was more like something I felt. as if being shaken awake, a jolt. Eric's reaction was totally out of character for him. Nothing rattled him, but he looked terrified. I could see how wide his eyes were, and he asked me in a slow, methodical whisper, "What was that?" Even I was a little surprised by my immediate response. It might have been comical if we weren't so terrified, but I told him it was a deer, knowing full well it was not a deer. But I was frozen. All I knew for sure was that if I freaked out, it was game over. I don't know why or what that would even look like, but I knew in that moment I had to keep it together. I felt on the verge of terror, and it made no sense. It was totally uncharacteristic of me as well. I loved the woods, and you couldn't keep me out of them at that time. I spent hours wandering the woods by myself, often in bare feet when the weather permitted. I've been in close proximity to black bear, face to face on the doorstep of my rural home. Bobcats, the occasional fox, and deer leaping right in front of me, startled by my presence. Being in the forest was my church, my quiet time with God, the only place I felt truly at home. So this experience didn't make sense, and still doesn't. Eric didn't move. He seemed frozen, sitting upright. Then we heard something that sounded big, with heavy footsteps walking around the tent. The last thing I remember before passing out was that it was circling the tent very close, just on the other side of the fabric of where I was laying. I got an image of something towering over us, and something just felt wrong. Yet I just fell asleep. The next morning, we woke at first light in a mental fog, and we packed up, and I don't recall ever talking about it. I've since lost touch with Eric, but would love to ask him what he remembers of that night. At that time, quote, Bigfoot, end quote, was nowhere on my radar. Whether I was hearing 2 feet, bipedal footsteps, or 4 was nothing I would have considered noticing either. But I've always had a sixth sense and know when something's off. I know the very specific sensation of discomfort that accompanies demonic influence on a person, place, or thing. Back then, in the tent, I had no reference for that experience. Now I think I do. It obviously did not harm us, but it was not a loving presence. It wasn't a wild animal curiously passing through. Was it Sabe? I don't know. But I don't want to experience it again. This sense of not being in control, frozen, and passing out does not sit well with me. I've suffered adrenaline dumps, and this was not that. Besides, if it were a bear or mountain lion, which absolutely are in western Massachusetts, I wouldn't have been scared like that. In awe perhaps, but not feeling like our lives depend on me keeping it together. What's more strange is that prior to that experience, I was out in Northern California and had an almost identical experience while sleeping in a tent by myself on a very secluded mountaintop. I woke up to the sound of something heavy walking around my tent and felt fear, but I have no memory until morning. I planned to stay a few nights, but the next morning I packed up and headed back to the cabin in a daze. My friend lived in the off-grid cabin. Very shortly afterward, I had a meltdown because I couldn't stand the sensation of that area any longer and had to get out of there. For what it's worth, in college I was on a small group trip abroad. While camping in the Serengeti one night, I woke to the sound of, quote, dogs, end quote, sniffing around our tent right by my head. It didn't faze me at all. Even when the members of our group were pointing out the tracks around our tent the next morning, talking about the hyenas that came into our camp, I didn't feel afraid. Definitely not on the verge of terror. It was exciting to be surrounded by so many beautiful predators, lol. My point is, the 2 experiences I described came with a level of discomfort that doesn't make sense or fit the context. There was so much more I could share about the other experiences, but I think it all boils down to this. Number 1, we are absolutely in a spiritual battle of good versus evil. Our power is in seeking God's wisdom for knowledge, truth, and understanding so that we can discern and choose wisely. Number 2, I know for certain that calling the name of Jesus specifically literally changes the atmosphere around us. I experience this regularly. It has never failed me. There have been so many experiences shared here that also attest to this. And number 3, my humble suggestion to you all: grab a Bible and read it with fresh eyes. Let go of what religion has taught us and seek to know the truth of God through your own relationship with our Creator. You'll find so many puzzle pieces there. Equals everything you need to know about human behavior and the tactics of the enemy of this world, aka the global elite seeking world domination, and how not to unwittingly consent to their agenda. I hope that what I've shared encourages others in some way and gives them hope. And I thank all those who have shared their experiences. You've certainly helped me. Remember that we are not alone. And I can't wait to buy some Howtohunt apparel so that we can begin to identify each other locally. I'll be the first to give a great big hug to anyone I see with a Howtohunt hat or sweatshirt, lol. Excuse me. Thank you, Steve, for creating the space for those of us who see and are courageous enough to seek truth and share knowledge for all the round table. I'll never understand people who choose the false comfort of being lied to instead of the discomfort of acknowledging the truth. But I pray their eyes would see and their ears would hear the truth. Keep growing in knowledge and choosing wisely, Howtohunt family. Love and God bless you all. You can say my name. People are going to think whatever they're going to think about me. Vila K. Vila, I appreciate your email. You're very kind. Kind, encouraging words. Every day we get them, right? Isn't that cool? We get kind and encouraging words every single day to start our day off. That's gold. Gold. And with that, I'm going to keep going. Who else needs to be heard? Actually, quick story. The ex-military Canadian Forces guy who was in Alberta and they were on maneuvers or in the wintertime is said it's never minus 25. Below or warmer than minus 25. Anyway, it shot me right back to one of the most uncomfortable times I ever had in the woods. I don't know when this was. This is in this is 20-something years ago. But anyways, there's 4 of us. 2 guys, 2 hunters. And we were about, first is a 1-day ride North Alaska Highway to a remote cabin. And then from there, went even farther north on a trail that I had cut where nobody had ever gone before with the horses a month earlier. And I had one wall tent, canvas wall tent set up. These guys wanted a big moose, each got 100 big moose. And I still have pictures of this too. And it was so cold. I remember waking up with my hair stuck to the side of the wall tent, frozen to it. I had to peel my head off the side of the tent, remember that? But I had to start a fire. Big fire in the dark, in the morning, and put the saddles and the saddle pads around the fire and even the bridles to melt them, get them soft enough that they could mold back around the horse. We're talking, I would pick up the metal bit that goes in the horse's mouth, for all you who are not familiar. The bridle, I'd grab onto the bit, and the bridle and the rein stuck out straight 90 degrees like frozen sticks. That's how cold it was. My God, that was cold. And we'd have to melt water on the fire in a frying pan and a pot. It was so cold and uncomfortable. And especially once we got this huge moose, you imagine the sweat that you would create getting that job done, and then having to pack up the tent in that cold and then start the ride out. And I believe it was all together, we decided to go all the way to the highway. That one day we decided to leave. We're going to ride the whole way. And you are sitting on that horse, frickin' frozen. I don't know what the temperature was. It was right around there in the minus 20s for sure. And it was a 14-hour horseback ride just to get to the highway. Never forget that one. Yeah. Back to the people. Okay, has this been read? Doesn't look like it. This is titled Mind Speak. Looks like a short one. Make sure I mark this as read. I'm 55 years old. I spent my whole life hunting and fishing and trapping. I experienced mind speak once turkey hunting, and it has basically ruined my life. You don't want to have mind speak with one of these things. I used to feel like I had to go hunting every day. And I mean, I had to go every day. I was blowing a turkey call in the mountains. I never seen him but he let me know he was there. I've caught and tied and wrestled wild hog with one dog. I'm a pretty tough fellow in the woods, and I'd hike 8 to 10 miles, never scared to go hunting or camping by myself. And since the mind speak, I ain't been back hunting in 10 years. Seeing one is different than when one communicates with you. It's a scary, scary feeling to have something in your head that you can't do anything about it, and you feel like something is about to eat your lunch. I've been back to the spot again, and it was not there, so it didn't do no good. Sorry, one more time. I have been back to the spot again, and it was not there, so it didn't do no good. If you ever need anybody to go anywhere to experience anything worth, I'll be the first one to go. I recently heard the story where people invited you to go mind speak with these things, and I'd love to go with you. I have lots of other stories and will continue to send them in. Thanks for what you do. Tori Roberts. Okay, Tori. Little vague, in a way. You got across the creepy part for sure, but what did you hear? What did you hear? What did this being tell you? Make sure you write back, alright, man? I want to know. I want to know what you got. Alright, here's one more, and then I'm gonna go get that fencing done so I can leave. Now, Sasquatch encounter. Forgive the email address, whatever that means. Steve, thanks for all you're doing. We're in a very strange and an inclusive club indeed. My encounter happened in July of '96 in the Trinity Mountains of Northern California. My roommates and I were out for summer break from Humboldt State, and we decided to go backpacking for the weekend, as we often did. Originally, we planned to visit the Ruth, R-U-T-H Lake trailhead. But it was raining hard, and our group decided to ask the rangers at the forest station where there was a good hike. My roommates from the Los Angeles area decided to be smartasses to the ranger, at which I was mortified, as my dad spent many summers as park ranger in Crater Lake, Oregon and Mount Rainier, Washington. I remember the ranger taking offense, and I saw a gleam in his eyes when he pointed out, nice hike for you all. He sent us to a trailhead in the Trinity Alps. I only recalled this after the encounter, racking my brain to try and figure out how we ended up in such a surreal situation. We hiked about 5 miles up a steep canyon and found a flat piece of real estate next to the raging creek. There were some nice granite slabs that we hung out on and bathed from that afternoon, careful not to get swept away by the swollen creek. Around 10 that night, we were sitting around a pre-existing campfire on some logs that had been arranged around it in a square. We had all heard voices, and what we thought were some people approaching our camp from above. We got ready to greet other backpackers, but realized that they were coming from the top of the mountain, down a very steep slope. Not the trail that followed the creek up the canyon. Their voices were deep and sounded like the samurai chatter that I've heard it described in other stories. I couldn't understand it, of course, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone is in our territory, and we're not happy about it. I swung my crappy flashlight at their silhouettes as they skirted our campsite, and caught a pair of eyes locked on me. They were whitish/yellow, large, and far apart. My reaction was one of disbelief, and the basic mindset that I seemed to adopt for the rest of the encounter, which I now suppose to be a survival instinct that helped me keep my sanity. Quote, "Nah, this isn't really happening to me," end quote. I kept telling myself this over and over throughout the encounter. I swung my flashlight off the spot, and then when I came back to it, the eyes were gone. Just then the stomping and hooting began, slow and first, and then building to a crescendo. The ground shook with every oot, 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 oot. There you go. T-O-O-T, O-O-T, O-O-O-T, and that's how it's spelled. The log I was sitting on was bouncing up and down on the logs below it. We all shared looks of shock and disbelief, and at that moment, I experienced the worst fear of my life. I resigned myself to the fact that I would probably die soon. When the stomping and hooting finally stopped, the voice I assumed to be the male, as it was deep and commanding, barked some orders and all was quiet. I assumed they would now attack and stomp us flat, but their voices circled below us, the higher-pitched females now responding to the orders. A few moments later, we heard huge splashes in the creek from upstream. Either they were throwing huge boulders into the creek or jumping cannonball style into it. Their voices were excited now, like a party or celebration, and then all went silent. Maybe a minute or two later, we heard the classic siren scream from the top of the canyon on the other side. I could feel it reverberate in my chest. I've had people try to convince me that these were just some people playing a prank on you. I always respond, no way a human can hike up that mountain that fast in pitch blackness. I also don't think anyone can scream that loud, even with amplification. Whatever made that noise was massive. It was a cross between a lion and Tarzan, and it seemed to be proclaiming its dominance over the region. I was just relieved that I was still alive, and they had moved farther away. I went to bed after stoking up the fire. I heard something walking outside and pulled my sleeping bag from my ears. My tent mate asked if I'd heard anything, but I was still in the "this can't be happening" mode, so I replied, nope. Just then the campfire went dark with the silhouette of the creature. I literally choked on my scream. Petrified to make any noise, I could only watch the shadow. Completely paralyzed. I remember its fingers groping the seam of the zipper and its breath pushing the tent fabric in and out. I could think, but my body couldn't move. I remember thinking I should grab my camera, but I was paralyzed with fear. I also remember getting the sensation that the creature knew I was aware of it and scared to death, and it was getting a kick out of it, almost like laughing. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up. I searched the area with a very new perspective that morning and found a hare, which I've since misplaced. I also noticed that the trail had some deep impressions but no clear tracks. Other than that, there was no trace of our encounter that night. Some things I feel I must share after the fact. I was the only one in our group with any outdoor experience, and I also have always been open to the idea of Bigfoot existing. I traveled to Bella Coola as a kid and heard the stories about Albert Ostman, Ape Canyon, and read, quote, Grizzly Bears and White Guys, end quote, by Clayton Mack. Yeah, our friend Jeff, photographer, he grew up there and knew those people and seen Sasquatch. Twice, I believe, there, I think, or once. He describes several encounters, one of which he sees one clearly through his rifle scope. I've got that book here somewhere. He says, no way I could shoot it. Looks too much like a man. His mom told him that shooting one is the worst mojo. You or someone in your family will soon die if you do shoot one. My roommates refused to talk about the situation and just nervously laughed it off, but yeah, they were scared for sure. I've never been shy about telling my story and will always recount the episode when requested, even in potentially skeptical audiences. I've never really worried about what people thought of my story. I know what I encountered, even if I didn't get a good look at the creatures. I've endured some ridicule, but I'm not afraid to stand up for what I believe, and all who challenge me go away assured that I'm speaking the truth. They may not believe it, but they all tell me they believe that what happened to me actually happened. I'm a teacher, so I've told every group of my students I've ever had this story and have acquired quite the reputation, thus the Nelson Bigfoot email. My first year teaching, I reported this sighting to that old website. I can't even stand saying the abbreviation for it anymore. On my school computer. To my surprise, the custodian asked what I was up to. I told him, and he shared a sighting he had when working on a fire crew. He said a huge man came running out of the fire area and passed him. Later he wondered what this humongous, hairy person was doing out there running at superhuman speed. I later found that the website used my story without contacting me on their poster. Number 34. You could, although I doubt you will, verify this on their website under sightings. California, yeah, we don't even want to push anybody over to those idiots. We got you, man. I know how you feel about the website, and I don't disagree. Although at the time it was the only place I could think to go with my incredible story. I totally agree. They are ridiculous. Traipsing around with camera packs, etc., and pretending to be an expert on them is laughable. I'm disgusted when they have the gall to tell people they didn't really see what they said they did. I've always said that if you wanted to find one, leave a game cam at your camp and then abandon it. You might not see them, but you'll probably get something interesting if they're around. The aura that night was almost supernatural. I felt that they not only intimidated us with their voice and sheer weight, but also with a feeling that we weren't welcome, as if they can communicate telepathically. It was an ominous feeling that seemed to weigh heavy on my heart and the back of my head. Their supernatural abilities are fairly well documented by Native Americans. They say they can hypnotize and paralyze people they encounter. I think that's what happened to me as I lay frozen in my tent, thinking about grabbing my camera but unable to move at all. Then not remembering anything until the next day. I feel that it was a teenage male, and coming back to our camp and waving his hand in my face was his way of counting coup, not unlike Native Americans do. I can relate to what you're saying about listening to other stories. Since my encounter, nearly 24 years ago, I've heard so many stories from people who have had their own encounters. The custodian, for example. Although in most cases they don't know what they are experiencing. Camping at Shaver Lake in the High Sierras, a fellow camper reported that she heard something grunting like a pig and stomping through the campsite. I heard it lift the dumpster, grunt, and let it drop, then it stomped off. There are no pigs at that elevation. Maybe someone at the campsite was dumpster diving at 3 a.m., but I think we both know what she was describing. I would think a bear would be more discreet, but she mentioned that it sounded like it was on 2 feet. She laughed nervously when I told her it was most likely a Bigfoot. Or a student who told me he was hiking on his aunt's property. She told him to leave the wildlife alone and they wouldn't bother him. So when he saw a, quote, monkey, end quote, crouched by the creek, he didn't give it a second thought, until I told him there are no monkeys native to North America. A fellow classmate didn't blink when I told him my story. He was from Northern California and related a story he had heard from a friend. Quote, I guess those things are mean, end quote, he said. His friend was hunting black bear near a salmon stream. He was watching a bear through his rifle scope when a Bigfoot came out of the brush, savagely killed the bear, and then stared back at his friends as if to say, you're next if you don't leave now. I also want to say thanks for the Blacktail app. My son and I have watched all your videos and they have helped us to defy the odds and take several nice blacktails on public land in California with archery tackle. Good news, man. It's good news. Knowledge is gold, right? Happy hunting, and yes, please use my name, Cliff Nelson. Cliff, thoroughly enjoyed reading that one, man. Appreciate you. And it's funny what you say about the Native Americans and what they have shared with us to date. Every single thing they've shared is a strong pattern of what everybody's repeating here. Right? So what does that mean? Should have been listening to them in the beginning. Right? Should have. For some reason, somebody, somewhere, some group, whoever they are, wherever they came from, has decided to change everything. Why is that? Who and why? Who led the charge at the deception? Who originally led the charge of us being manipulated, herded, and lied to? Right? That is where I am in my head the majority of all this time. I'm there nonstop. I want to know who and why. Who originally started manipulating us in the wrong direction? Who? Why? Guess they're doing a damn good job these days, aren't they? Holy shizzle. Man, oh man, are the herdable humans being herded and lied to currently. at a pace and a level that, yeah, how do you even describe it? It's amazing and very, very frustrating to witness, isn't it? Why? How many times are you guys going to hear me say that? Why are we being lied to? Why are we being lied to? Right? And so you understand more of my stance on when somebody else go beat on a tree or leave pheromone chips and trail cameras and plaster casts of footprints, teach their own. But come on, don't you want to find out why you're being lied to at the same time? Like, why isn't that thought eating the living shit out of everybody else's brains at the same time? Why not? You know, like, come on, get angry, get pissed, get motivated, demand the answers. Not demand it. We can find our answers ourselves. We don't need anybody. That's the thing. You don't put somebody in that position of authority on you for anything, right? You make it about the people. And you share knowledge openly and you take care of each other. That's what we're supposed to be doing. The moment you put somebody in that position, they got you, right? They got all of you. When you put another human being above you in a position of authority. F that, right? Who are the original dirty bastards who started to take us all down that road of lies? Why? Why? Why aren't children, especially in rural communities, allowed to be taught the facts about these wild, human-like beings running around in the forests and mountains? Why? Why are they kept in the dark? Why? Right? Why? Anyway. And that's why, I'm sure some people get tired of my rants. Oh well, whatever is what it is. You can leave the channel, right? Some people ask me why I get so angry in a way when it comes to that past popular website. Because they have taken the testimonies from the brave people who have been troubled at what they saw and changed their stories intentionally. Left out details, belittled and humiliated people who stood behind what they saw because it didn't fit their false narrative of lies they've been feeding all the people previously. You can't get more, we could get a little more evil, but that's pretty frickin' disgusting as far as I'm concerned. When you see the fright and terror and the discomfort in the eyes of someone telling you what they saw and they're terrified of you, and it takes so long to convince them that they're safe to share with you, that's troubling in itself. And then you finally get them there and then they're spilling. And it's changed lives. It takes a lot of courage, man. For some people, it takes a lot of courage to get up to share their truth. And then to have a place that claims to be a safe place and supportive, take their truth and shit on them, and change the details and leave details out, humiliate them. That's not good. I'll bite my lip on my reaction to that one because it's not a pleasant one. So yeah, I sincerely hope that everyone has kicked that group to the frickin' curb. Kick it right out of the way to the curb and make it about each other, the people, right? And the truth. And create a safe place for the good people, the safe place for the honest people, the safe place for the messed up people who didn't ask for the shit. See, I'm starting to get fired up, right? Because that is what I'm passionate about. That is a big motivation for me to be here with all of you and keep it going. As long as they're around, we're going to be around longer. As long as people want us to be quiet, we're going to get louder. Right? We're going to get louder, and it's working. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's been a handful of people who consider themselves big names in the previous, in the so-called Bigfoot world, and I've watched their numbers dwindle and fizzle. Every single channel that came after myself here and all you and attacked and made videos trying to discredit, every single one of their channels, their names is gone dead in the water. Whereas before, they used to be so-called authorities. Right? Anyways, I'm rambling, you guys. I'll get you going. Obviously, I can get passionate about some aspects of this topic, right? Rightfully so. No apologies. Right? This isn't a safe place for people who support offended culture. This isn't a safe place for people who need to be in control of people. This isn't a safe place for liars. This is a very safe place for the good, honest, courageous people.